Hi everyone, welcome back to the Big Five Mental Health Podcast. Today's episode is on depression. So as usual, today's podcast is going to have a little bit of a schedule to it. First, we're going to start with basic facts, things you need to know. Then we're going to move into statistics, real research backed by evidence, doctors, scientists. Then we're going to go into our student speaker section where a real student is going to share their experience with mental health. Then we're going to go into our global charity, which is going to show a charity that's working to improve the lives of people with this condition and how you can get involved with them. Then we're going to go to my personal favorite part, Celebrity Spotlight, which is going to show the portrayal of this mental health challenge in the media, people who you may not know have the mental health challenge and what they say about it. Finally, we're going to go to our therapist corner where a specialist on this mental health challenge is going to tell all, give you everything they know, tips on how to deal with it if you think you might have it, etc. And that's it. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to be talking about some basic facts and things that you need to know about depression, just kind of an overview to get you started. So depression is a condition, mental health condition, caused by kind of a deficiency or irregularity in the release of certain hormones in the brain, like dopamine and serotonin. They're called sometimes happy hormones, you might know them as that. And they can cause kind of an altered perception of life and reality, really deep or repeating long periods of sadness or a lack of motivation that don't necessarily have a cause, but they just really plague the person who has them. And it makes it really hard to do the things that they love. Be outside, go visit friends, move around at home, even do basic things like hygiene and chores, things like that. There's a lot of it's a really deep sadness that causes almost a paralyzing feeling of needing to lay in bed and just either oversleeping or feeling numb, not really having an awareness of what's around you just because you're so sad. And obviously that can be really tough for someone who has depression. And the biggest misconception about it from a lot of people's perspective is that there needs to be a cause and that there needs to be something that's going wrong for someone to have a depressive episode or something like that. But that's just the point, is that because of the irregularity of the hormones in the brain, depression it's not logical. It really just happens when it happens. And so someone could just they could get a depressive episode or feel depressed at a time when it doesn't feel like they necessarily have anything to be depressed about. But knowing that, it's important to remember that people don't have to have a reason, and that being depressed or depression is just as important if it doesn't have a specific cause or reason. So depression can be really dangerous as far as the effects of it and things like that, just because the depression and the sadness that people get into really, in addition to alienating themselves from their friends and family and from the things that they really like to do, can cause a lot of harmful self-talk and thinking I'm horrible, I'm useless, nobody wants me here, I'm worthless, I'm nothing, things like that. And when obviously that's not true, but someone with depression is more inclined to believe that just because of the way their brain is operating and the headspace that they're in. And so that can lead to, if untreated, in extreme cases, things like self-harm or even suicidal ideation, which is something we really want to prevent before it even gets there, of course. And so that's why it's important to recognize depression early on and recognize the symptoms, recognize when we might need help, and start those treatment processes right away. One thing that I will say is that with depression and depressive episodes, the inclination from a lot of people that you will see if you're someone who knows someone with depression or maybe feel like you might have it, the inclination is to isolate and to be alone and to kind of alienate oneself from the people who love them. But especially if there are things like harmful thoughts or negativity going on, it's really important to just know that someone is nearby and to have someone nearby. So if you are someone that has a friend or a loved one who has depression, just know that even if they don't want you to be in the presence with them, it's important to keep checking on them and being near them and being there if they do want to talk, because depression gets worse alone. And loneliness is only going to make it stronger and harder and more dangerous for the person who does have it. So even if you're not with them or talking to them, just be around and be there, and try to remember that when they're seeming to alienate you or try to push you away, it's the depression talking, not them. So you're going to have to make a little bit of a decision yourself to kind of override what they're telling you to do, but it is for their own good. Trust me. So, as far as treatments, there's a lot of things that we can do with depression. I also want to clarify something about depression, which is that a lot of people aren't able to recognize the line between, am I just sad or am I depressed? And what I've been hearing from a lot of the people, the therapists and the student speakers we've been talking to, is that if it's affecting a majority of your life and you are feeling more often depressed than not, then I think that there's something going on, and it's at least worth checking out. And as a lot of people say, it's better to be safe than sorry, so there's no harm in, if you think that something's wrong, talking to someone or starting to get help, doing something like that. So that's something to remember. As far as treatment goes, obviously it's really, really hard to manage depression and constantly feeling depressed or depressed episodes in school and in life and in work, because life moves fast, things move fast, things need to be done, people need to be seen, and that's not conducive to wanting to just lock ourselves away from the world and stay in bed, So that's really, really tough. But one thing to remember, it's a baby step process, one by one, little by little, things you can do. Distractions, they don't always work, but sometimes if you really, really enjoy doing something like watching TV, baking, crafts, going on walks, video games, playing sports, and if there's anything like that you think could bring you out of or has brought you out of a depressive episode before, I would latch on to that, because having that gives you a little bit of a break from the sadness all the time and reminds you that there is happiness and there is fun to be had in life. And that's the first step to recovery in a lot of people's book. So, there are also things you can do with diet and routine alterations. This can come with things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which we've talked about before, but can be used to treat depression too, which just means having either a more structured or more preferable routine daily and figuring out how to spend your time in a way that makes you happy and is less likely to catapult you into that state of depression or keep you in that state of depression. Whatever it works, it's different for every person, but things like that. Going outside, positive self-talk, therapy, talk therapy is really important, or just talking to people that you love and having them be there for you and being open about your feelings, because people can't help you if they don't know what you're going through, right? Talk therapy is always really common, can be group with other kids or people who have depression, individual, or even family, to help your family adjust to what's going on and know how to keep the environment positive for you and help best assist you with your recovery. And then of course there are medications. That is always a component. I have to say, always consult a mental health professional before taking any medication, and it's very different for everyone. There are different things that work, and it's not for everyone, but it can help for some people, so definitely do the appropriate research and things before that. But some of the most common depressive medications include Zoloft, Prozac. They're called antidepressants, and they essentially kind of counteract the hormone imbalances that are happening in the brain and just give you that first extra push to recovery. And then for anyone who knows someone who might have depression or is dealing with the situation with a loved one or a friend, just remember, like I said before, being around and being there for them to talk to is the best thing that you can do, because eventually they may want to talk, and you should be there to help them and give them what they need, even if they tell you that they don't, because in reality, being lonely is only going to make it worse. And then also, as a way to kind of keep the environment healthy and positive, we want to acknowledge and validate their feelings, because they are true. Everyone knows what it's like to feel really, really, really sad. Even if you don't have depression, you know what it's like to be in the lowest of lows, you know, and feel hopeless and whatever. And so you have to think about the fact that someone with depression is feeling like that a lot of the time. And that's really, really tough. So to validate their feelings and to say, I'm here for you, that sucks that this is happening to you, but I'm here, and this is a real thing. This is real, this is valid, is really, really important, and will probably make it feel like for them, it's easier to talk to you and easier to open up, and you guys can both go from there. So that's all we have for the basics of depression, facts, and overview. As always, we're going to go into our statistics section just to give you a little bit of a bigger idea of demographics and facts and evidence about depression. And as always, this is meant to be used as a way to see that you're not alone. It really does affect a large percent of human populations in the US and beyond. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the data. And let's go.
I want to talk about overthinking, right, and how that can lead to a bunch of things, leading to depression and being more crippling than ever. I want to talk about also my experiences and how doing things helped my mental health and took away how I overthink and how anxiety can take over my body, and just to be fine again, I guess. Well, there's a line between sad and depression, like you said. And some days, yes, it's just me being sad, being gloomy.
Yeah.
And that's all right. Not everyone's happy all the time.
Yeah.
But there is times where I'm just full on depressed, and when I feel those things, it's not necessarily just big feelings of sadness. It's more like numbness. How my body just reacts so mellow, right? And it's not like I can't feel things, but like it feels like feeling is just not there.
Yeah, you're just kind of detached.
Yeah, exactly. I've been dealing with it for a while. At first, it was reaching out to some of my friends, and like I said before, I felt like a burden every time I would share how I felt. So it would be just a tiny handful of friends, and to those friends, I would rant for ages. But then they said, hey, I think you should talk to someone. At first, I didn't really want to go to therapy. Because, I don't know, I don't really like sharing my feelings to an adult that I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I ended up going to those counselors, school counselors.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And at first I was paranoid that they would share everything.
Yeah.
But no, they kept everything, and I would just rant, and then they would give me valid points on how to calm down, right, and why I should calm down, and they would make me feel like my points and my feelings are valid.
I love
right? And you can see that even with young adults or 17-year-olds, or 17 and 16-year-olds. Depends on who you talk to. There's different perspectives, right? You have someone that's brutally honest, right? And some people need that, right? That's the help some people need. Or you have someone like me that needs like someone that beats around the bushes and like can say, hey, this is, yeah, right, but like, just so you know, this is also going on, right? I needed someone like that, and those counselors were that someone, right? So that helped, really. It could even be your pet.
Yeah.
Right? If you could talk to your pet. Just, I feel like everyone deserves someone so they could just rant to and talk to.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes someone just needs to vent in order to get through it. Right? And because they can guide themselves sometimes.
Yeah.
I didn't really talk to my parents on how I felt.
That's okay.
I don't know. Both my parents are Latinos. Right? My dad's Cuban, my mom's Mexican. My dad was born on a whole different standard. So, and he's like not used to change, or how like mental health is really big now, right, in this century.
Yeah.
He's not used to that. So I've never been open to sharing how I actually felt. To my mom, on the other hand, I've talked to her sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes where, and it's always at like the climax, where I'm about to just break down.
Yeah.
Right? That's because I can't take it anymore. And I tell her that. I don't think she knows that I overthink a lot. And I feel like every time I try telling her, she plays it off like, oh, just chill out. Right?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
That's really tough. Yeah. I know what you mean.
Everyone deserves to talk to somebody. And don't get me wrong, I love my parents to death.
Of course.
Right? But there's sometimes it's just some things that I can't say to my parents. From a guy's perspective,
Oh yeah.
not all guys like to talk about their feelings. I've been taught, strangely enough, being in a whole family full of guys, I've been taught to be vulnerable, right?
Really? That's great.
To be vulnerable, to talk about your feelings. Don't be afraid to talk about them.
Yeah.
And I feel like everyone should.
Yeah.
And some advice I can give to that is, like I said, find your group of friends, right? And I'm not saying those group of friends that you hang out with and you guys talk about random things.
Yeah.
I'm talking about your friends that you can stay out late, right? And I'm exaggerating. It's like stay out late, have those deep conversations with, by like a bonfire, right? Someone that you feel like you could truly trust. Right? Talking to those people, even the casualest conversation. Like, yeah, I've been feeling bad. I've been feeling weird. Right? That can help a lot.
Okay.
And having those bonds and build your bonds better.
So my name's Kanoa. I go to CCA. I'm part of PALS, and I really enjoy surfing, going to the beach, and listening to music. And today I'm going to talk about finding happiness in everything you do from day to day, and trying to find some sort of gratitude in the activities that you do. I see a lot of these people, they struggle with a sense of hopelessness in their lives, and it seems that setting these small goals and finding the small things help accomplish bigger things, especially if you're going through depression or if you have anxiety. It's getting over those small bumps that help you go higher and higher each time. So I think that finding that gratitude and finding that small happiness in everything that you do is really. I know this sounds repetitive, but I think a lot of teenagers on social media, they see these huge undertakings and these huge happy events, and they're only showing you the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Underneath all that, there's the planning, which can be very difficult. And overall, you're just seeing the best of the best, the highlight reel. So I think just finding the little bits of happiness, I think, is a big thing. And the misconception that a lot of teenagers have is that happiness comes when, like, you get a new car, when you get a big present, when you, like, meet someone new. But it's the small things, like maybe just enjoying a meal or just enjoying what's in the moment. I think a lot of people should look for instead of those big things. What helps me is to maybe just take a little bit, just breathe, maybe just look around and just think about what brings you joy. For me, what really helps is my dog. My dog always seems happy to greet me. No matter how long the day is, no matter if she's eaten or not, she's always excited to see me. So I kind of take inspiration from that, and I think no matter what my day is looking like, I'm going to try to be happy and try to show my appreciation towards others and try to find that little bit of happiness.
My name is Shauna Pichette. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Wisconsin and Oregon, and then a licensed professional clinical counselor in the state of California. I'm a supervisor in all of those states, which means I help people who are not licensed yet get their license. And I've been working in the mental health field officially since graduation. I think it was 10 years ago now. Yeah, 10 years ago. And I kind of found my niche pretty early on, working with OCD and anxiety disorders, primarily with that, a lot of comorbid depression, some eating disorders, and some other stuff that comes along with that territory. So a lot of times when people think depression, they think of someone who's just kind of sad. When really what we know about depression is it's so much more. There's a chemical imbalance that's happening in the brain that causes really significant sadness, and not just sadness, but I almost would describe it as like a numbness a lot of the times. It's like almost this numbness, this lack of interest in things, this isolation, almost feels kind of like apathy, like nothing matters. And for major depressive disorder, that goes on for 2 weeks or longer at a time. For persistent depressive disorder, which is one of our other depressive disorder diagnoses, people are just more depressed than others for 2 years or more. And they can also have those bouts of those 2 week or more of a really concentrated experience of sadness. Along with that, it can be things like social isolation, lack of interest in things, not wanting to, difficulty getting out of bed, sleeping too much or sleeping too little, no interest in food or eating too much food, and just that's kind of the only thing that gives them any sort of comfort. And there can be some suicidality too, and some self-harm concerns, and a lot of hopelessness that comes with that depression. So I would say that's kind of the brief overview, but when I'm describing to someone, it's like very intense sadness, apathy, numbness, lack of interest, I would say really sums it up. I see this with all ages, but I would say in particular, a lot of times teens, like especially when their family's kind of looking to see what's going on, a lot of teens are more irritable or angry rather than like outwardly sad or down. Like a lot of times it's just very quick to anger, kind of a short fuse. And we call anger actually a secondary emotion. So that means there's usually some other emotion behind the anger. And in the case with teens, a lot of times it can be like that depression or other feelings of intense sadness that are going on and causing them to kind of lash out. And like a lot of times I find too that the teens that I work with are confused too as to why it's happening, which gets more frustrating for them. It's like, hey, I have all these friends, I have these parents who love me, I have, I'm in sports and I'm getting good grades. Why am I so sad? And then they turn inward on themselves and like kind of feed that and spiral a little bit more with that. So I'd say a lot of that confusion, but then a lot of that irritability too, anger, short fuse, that type of stuff with teens. So depression is caused by a chemical imbalance or what's happening during depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain. And so it's literally not the person's fault, right? So often people who are depressed can point to positive things in their life and say, this doesn't make sense that I'm feeling this way, that I'm feeling this hopeless, that I'm feeling this alone when I have X, Y, and Z going on. So why do I feel like this? And it can be really frustrating for people to not understand where that's coming from. It's, I would say, almost like it's like the want is there, like of people, like people want to get better, they want to make the changes, but it's almost like there's this big mental block that's stopping a lot of times people from getting the help that they need. And I would say that's one of the hardest parts, is like caring enough about yourself to even take that first step. When you're feeling so sad and so numb and so just like isolated and hopeless, like taking that first step feels almost impossible. And like, so people often know what they're supposed to do, but it's like to do it is just, it's like dragging your feet through mud. So I'd say that's one of the hardest parts, is like seeing it and like knowing like, okay, logically I know what to do, and logically I know I have these good things happening, but to do any of that stuff, it feels like, yeah, like I describe it as like walking through water. You know, like swimming is easy, right? You kind of glide on through, but if you're trying to walk through that current and it's just pushing on you, everything just feels heavier and harder. And that's kind of what depression feels like. So with suicidal ideation, we have kind of like some different levels of it. So sometimes it's more of, I just don't want to be here anymore. I wouldn't be mad if I went to sleep and never woke up. In fact, I'm kind of hoping for it. And then we have more intense of like, I actually do, I want to die, or I want to do something to escape this pain. And if death's that route, then it's that route. So different levels of suicidal ideation, and, people are going to intervene differently at different levels. And there's self-harm, which can be done. So stereotypical self-harm we think about are things like, cutting, burning, scratching oneself. And it's usually a way to like release pain or feel like a sense of control. But then I also see some sort of like risky behaviors as like a form of self-harm. Like maybe it's things like not eating, or making, using substances, or reckless driving, things where it's like, well, I don't really care what happens to me, so I'm going to make kind of these impulsive or reckless decisions and kind of just hope something happens. So yeah, there's a whole spectrum with that. And I think it's really important to talk about, especially with teens, because, teens do struggle with this, and they're often afraid to tell like teachers or parents or a trusted adult, because they're not sure what the, how the response is going to be. So I think it is really important to talk about. Unfortunately, depression and suicidal ideation, self-harm, a lot of times those are kind of misunderstood. So if you can get a professional involved in that conversation, that's usually the best plan of attack. So if you are reaching out to a therapist or a guidance counselor or some trusted adult in your life to kind of help who's like mental health informed, to kind of help facilitate that conversation, that can be helpful. Some people are very lucky who have parents who are very understanding of mental health concerns. That's not always the case though, right? So I guess it really depends on people's relationships with their parents, but a lot of times having that adult, mental health professional there to facilitate that conversation can be helpful. So then they can kind of explain the pieces and help parents to understand, or, friends to understand what's going on a little bit better. Because sometimes it's not always well received, but sometimes it is very understood. And a lot of times, when kids have those conversations, sometimes they learn that parents have had their own mental health struggles, or are currently dealing with something similar. And maybe there's a genetic component, because we do know that mental health has a huge genetic piece as well. So yeah, I think the more kind of support you can get with that conversation, the better. And, once you're, depending on what state you live in, 13 or 14, you can consent to your own therapy services too. So like, if someone's parents are really just not on board, people can give their own consent at a certain age too. People can't support you if they don't know what's going on, right? If you're not open and honest about it. And I always tell my clients, like, I would rather have you safe and like, stressed out for a little bit about this than anything else, right? Rather safe than sorry. So can we get your supports in here? And I'm happy to have those conversations between kids and their parents, and help them, help parents understand how much oversight is appropriate, and how to kind of support their struggling kiddo, or teenager, depending on the age, of course, but different ways to just, get people involved to keep people safe. That's the number one priority, is safety.
You run the risk of getting worse, right? So what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, that's a really tough situation to be in. And unfortunately, it is something I do see, where people open up and they're met with like, well, just don't feel that way, or, pray about it, or try different, like, have you tried just not doing that? And it's like, well, yeah, of course, like, of course I've tried not feeling this way. So it can feel very invalidating and isolating, and that person then often like puts distance, a little more distance or a wall up kind of between them and that other person, right? Because they feel like, well, this isn't someone I can necessarily open up to. But when you do have like that mental health professional involved, they can help educate. I think education's a huge piece. I think my adult clients, I'm like, of course, here, let's have you educate, your loved ones. But I think it's hard, to put that kind of responsibility on a teenager. I don't think that's necessarily fair for the teen to have to be the one educating. So the more that you can get maybe some other trusted adult involved. So sometimes, maybe parents aren't the most open to it, but you have maybe an aunt or a family friend or someone at school who you can talk to, or a guidance counselor, right? Or mental health professional, whatever it may be. Just so you have someone who is understanding what's going on and is helping you feel seen and understood can be really powerful. Now, sometimes it's people think that people who are depressed are just sad, or they're being kind of lazy. That's why they don't want to do the things or take care of their household or do their schoolwork. It's like they're just lazy, but really it's like this all-encompassing feeling with depression. Like I said, it feels like walking through water. It feels like the world around you is just like this big gray foggy cloud that you're just kind of existing in. Colors can feel kind of muted, even like it can be such like an all-encompassing experience, but people minimize it so much. Like, oh yeah, people feel sad all the time. There's this idea of like, just kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, get over it, change how you're feeling, just do the thing and you'll feel better, or but it's like that it is such like a hurdle to get over. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is it's just sadness, or like this thing that people can control. Right? If mental health could be controlled, there'd be no reason for therapists like me, right? A lot of your role to your friends is going to be just kind of listening, hearing them, validating their experience, letting them know that what they're going through sounds hard. And I think a lot of times people are very like quick to offer up advice, like, oh, have you tried, exercising? Have you tried eating healthy? And it's like, yeah, like I can't even get myself to eat anything, let alone, go do this or that, and so I think a lot of times it's very well meaning for people to offer up advice, but sometimes what your friend who's depressed needs is just a listening ear. And sometimes they need someone to just kind of sit there with them through their experiences, right? Maybe, or encourage them to come with for different activities. So if maybe your friend doesn't really have it in them to go to some big group hangout, right? Maybe they feel okay to at least be kind of take a little walk in the neighborhood or something like that, right? Something that is going to help them feel better. But it's also not on you to make your friend feel better, but you can be there for them. And then if there is ever any safety concerns, like it is really important to get an adult involved, like a trusted adult, because again, we'd rather have people safe than not. Like that's our number one priority, is that safety. So if a friend mentions that they're, struggling with suicidality or self-harm, helping them to identify an adult that they can share that with to keep them safe. Talking to like a trusted adult, kind of opening up about what's been going on. And then, even if they don't meet criteria for, major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, like a depressive disorder, like they could still, if they're feeling seen in some of those things, there's still a good chance that they could benefit from getting some mental health support from a professional, right? And that person isn't your parent, and it's not, like a relative or anything like that. So it's an unbiased third party who can kind of support with those things too, and offer some skills and guidance as far as like how to feel better, even if it's not full-blown depression. Or if it is, then you got the tools right there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, yeah, first step is just sharing that experience. CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, is pretty kind of the top treatment modality there. And within that scope, so I practice from a CBT and behavioral activation, so CBT and BA lens. CBT functions through the lens that our thoughts, our behaviors, and our emotions are all connected. It's not very easy for us to just change our emotions or change our thoughts. So we're going to intervene by changing behaviors first and let those other pieces follow. So those thoughts and those emotions will follow. We also have acceptance commitment therapy, which is all about engaging more like to kind of sum it up very briefly, of course, is about engaging more with your valued activities and making choices that move you closer to your values. And having some what we call cognitive flexibility, because a lot of times with depression, there's very black and white thinking. Like everything is terrible, everything is awful. So can we work on living in that gray space? Can we have some cognitive flexibility here? I'd say those are the two primary. Those are also the two that I practice in, so I know the most about. But I know there are other methods as well for treating depression. That are also, you always want to look for something that's going to be evidence-based practices, because that's something that's going to have decades of research supporting it and saying that it's effective. One of the first lines of treatment is going to be an antidepressant or a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI. There's also NSRIs and other classifications of medication as well, but I would say the most common are going to be those SSRIs. And what those do is those change the way that your neurons fire in your brain to help. So they close off some different ports and they open up some others, and it helps rebalance the serotonin levels in your brain. So that's what I meant when I was saying earlier too about that chemical imbalance, right? The SSRI helps to correct that chemical imbalance. The chemical imbalance can also be targeted through behavioral activation, so through CBT and things like that. They do see changes, but of course, when you've got a med on board, it's just going to kind of change the chemistry a little bit differently. And so sometimes people choose to have medication, sometimes they don't. I don't, I think it's up to every individual and their provider to determine what's the right path for them. Because I have some people who are like, oh, I don't want that. Others who are, open to it or really want to just rely on medication. There's really not 100% right answer, as a blanket statement, I should say. But I do usually advocate for any sort of mental health treatment to go through a psychiatrist when available. I think mental health advocacy is so incredibly important, and it's something that often is misunderstood. And so the more education we can share on that, the less that people are suffering in silence. And especially when there's so many things that are like treatable, right? There's evidence-based treatments for these different disorders. And so if people can get a better quality of life through that, that's amazing. I think it's especially important with teens because, like you said earlier, we lose so many teenagers to their mental health disorders. So if we can save some teenagers and help them have a better quality of life, like that's incredible. And I think, God, being a teenager is so hard as it is, right? Like being a teenager is tough. And when you're struggling with mental health stuff on top of it and feeling alone, like, oh my gosh, it's hard. It's so hard. And so like, I think just any bit of relief that we can offer up to people is just incredible. And more free resources are, I love that there's so many free resources out there now, like podcasts like this, right? Like it gets that education to people who need it and who can maybe hear that and say, hey, maybe I'm not alone. Maybe there is something that's going on that I can get some help with. The primary depression, where people have a depressive disorder. Sometimes we have a secondary depression where people are depressed because of another mental health condition. So I speak of this a lot in my work with OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of times OCD makes people kind of turn inward, isolate, right? They're embarrassed of their compulsions or they're worried about like the content of their obsession. So they kind of cut people out slowly and more slowly. And then pretty soon their world gets really small. And then they start feeling really depressed, right? Or they start feeling really depressed because of the way that they're feeling so controlled by their OCD symptoms or, whatever it may be. And so that's like a secondary depressed mood. So they're feeling depressed. It looks like depression, but really the OCD is the culprit. And so once you work on that OCD, that secondary depressed mood picks up, it lifts. Right? It gets better because you're engaging with more enjoyable activities. You're getting out of the house. You're understanding what's going on inside your own brain. And you're getting that quality of life back. Sometimes I do see a little bit where people have both depression and like an anxiety or an OCD, and they are too depressed to do their compulsions. And so their OCD gets a little bit better, but their depression gets worse and does a little bit of like a seesaw thing. But with some strategic planning that can be remedied pretty quickly. So I'd say for the most part, when you work on one thing, other pieces tend to fall into place, and things start to feel a little bit better overall. That is sad, right? It's sad to hear how some people genuinely feel about themselves. But I would say the first, like I almost describe it as like kind of tricking yourself into loving yourself. So you behave as if you love yourself. And you keep doing it over and over and over again. And then eventually you start to go, hey, maybe I'm not so bad, right? Maybe I do love myself. So the more that you treat yourself as if you love yourself, going back to that CBT triangle, right? Those emotions and those thoughts are going to kind of follow suit. A lot of it is changing the way that you talk to yourself too. So practicing self-compassion instead of, hey, you're a garbage person and I can't believe you did this. It's like, okay, well, I'm human and humans make mistakes, right? So responding with that self-compassion and common humanity, all little by little, it will help people to learn to, I would say the first step is tolerate yourself, accept yourself, and then love yourself can follow later. I think too, it's like especially hard for a lot of teenagers to learn to love themselves because there's so many changes happening, and it's like I said, being a teenager is hard, and so it's really hard for teens, I think, to love themselves. And some of that will just kind of come with time too. The more you learn to forgive yourself and practice that self-compassion and behave as if you do love yourself. That first step might feel really, really scary to just like reach out or to listen to a podcast or to admit that, maybe something is going wrong. That first step can be really hard, but there is hope and things do get better and there's help. There's help out there.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Big Five Mental Health Podcast. As always, there will be links for everything that we use to make this and research links, things that you can do to get involved, all linked at the bottom of the podcast. So hopefully you'll make use of those. And I just want to thank you so much for being here, because ending the stigma and educating is really a two-way street. So whether you're someone who thinks you might have a mental health challenge or are the friend or loved one of someone who does, it's really important that you're here, and it was a great first step to take. So I hope you learned something. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.